Morning all. I want to start by paying my respects to the Kaurna people, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also acknowledge, is Don here? He's on my list. Hi Mel. There he is. Hi Don, who's done so much for regional South Australia in his job, and all my ministerial and parliamentary colleagues who are here. I just spoke to the Premier on the way out, and I heard him on the as we were driving here, and I hope he had a good engagement with him. And thanks to the Tiser for bringing us all together. Tiser's got a proud history of campaigns, compelling action on issues that have affected the lives of South Australians. In fact, I've still got a newspaper clipping on the wall of my Adelaide office from the Save Our Murray campaign. I remember pretty vividly the daily front pages when I was Water Minister telling me to buy back more water, fair enough, but at the same time there were people upstream who were burning effigies of me, so it sort of reminded us of why the Murray-Darling's pretty hard to deal with. This is obviously a fantastic event and a really powerful forum to examine so many of the issues which shape your communities that are central to who we are and to our prosperity. You know, we all know of the strength and resilience of bush communities, but we shouldn't skip over the serious challenges regions face and continue to face, challenges which in many ways have forged the resilience we speak of. Prolonged dry periods, more weather extremes impacting on agriculture and downstream industries. The cost of insurance, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of services, skill shortages, the loss of industries and the jobs that go with them. Patchy telecommunications coverage, digital connectivity, the impact of instability in global export markets on regional economies and jobs, and much more. So it isn't enough to celebrate the resilience of our communities. We know we can't take it for granted, and we have to contribute to it. The government knows how important regions are in building a stronger Australia. We understand that means doing more to harness the opportunities that exist in our regions, but also doing more to stimulate regional economies and build thriving communities by providing regional communities with the services that people are calling for. But first, the cost of living. Australians in cities, Australians in regions, Australians all over the country are doing it really tough because of cost of living pressures. And I know that the Premier had a discussion about inflation in the Q&A. Certainly when we came to government, inflation had a 6 in front of it. We have made some progress since 2022. It's at half of its peak and underlying inflation is falling, but it is still tough. And everywhere I go around Australia and in Adelaide and South Australia, people remind me of that. And that's why we have been focused on rolling out vital cost of living help, supporting higher wages and delivering tax cuts to all Australians and tax cuts which benefited middle and low income Australians more. Energy bill relief, cheaper childcare and cheaper medicines, all opposed by our political opponents. It's also clear that Australians living in rural and remote areas have higher rates of hospitalisation, higher rates of death and injury, and poorer access to primary health care services than those who live in metropolitan areas. So we have been focusing on how do we make it cheaper and easier to see a doctor. We funded more urgent care clinics like the one in Mount Gambier which opened in November, one of 24 clinics now treating patients in regional, rural and remote areas. And since we tripled the bulk billing incentive, there have been over 114,000 additional bulk billed visits to the doctor in regional, rural and remote SA. Growing regional economies also requires us to boost employment opportunities, and we're partnering with states and territories to deliver 500,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places to 2026, because you can't get the jobs that we need people to fill without the skills that those jobs require. About a third of enrolments are in inner and outer regional locations like Mount Barker and Murray Bridge. And we want to bring university closer to students in the regions, which is why we're opening new regional university study hubs. There are 6 in South Australia, from Murray Bridge to Roxby, and the 7th will be the Flurio Study Hub in Victor Harbour. Of course, affordable housing is key to attracting and retaining the workforce the regions need, and we've established the Housing Australia Future Fund to help deliver tens of thousands of new homes, including in regional, rural and remote areas. We have the regional first home buyer guarantee, supporting eligible home buyers to purchase a home in a regional area with a deposit of as little as 5%. So, whether it's wages, taxes, energy bills, housing, cheaper childcare, medicines and affordable health and education services, we are trying to help Australians in the region. But we also want to strengthen regional economies, putting regional industries at the centre of our Future Made in Australia plan. From vast energy resources, advantages in new clean energy industries, world-leading agricultural sector and regional innovation, we want to leverage these competitive advantages that exist in the region. Harnessing these opportunities demands we make progress on enablers such as infrastructure, and 6 South Australian projects amongst those receiving federal funding through the Growing Regions program: Penneshaw Foreshore Upgrade, Barossa Creative Industries Centre and the Copper Coast Regional Aquatic Facility in Wallaroo. And we're progressing road safety projects under the Infrastructure Investment Program, as we all understand how important it is to have confidence on the roads we're driving on. Our state share of that funding pipeline is about $10 billion over the next 10 years. We've committed currently to 36 projects, 17 in regional areas, with another 4 bridging the urban regional boundary. And of course, back to the Murray-Darling, we know there's little infrastructure that is more important than the national infrastructure of the Murray-Darling Basin. And we've worked hard to get that plan back on track after a decade of inaction and sabotage. All of these actions represent our strategic, coordinated and whole-of-government approach to lifting up Australia's regions. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about my role as Foreign Minister. But with Don, we are working to create opportunities and to promote and protect Australia's interests as an exporter of choice in a very competitive international environment. We're working to help to build and maintain the strategic conditions that enable Australia's prosperity and stability. Jim Chalmers has noted that the global economy is framed by a number of really serious challenges: heightened geostrategic competition, so between the great powers, an international system that is under continuous pressure, whether it's from war, pandemic or disaster, or the undermining of rules and institutions, demographic change, major changes and risks to supply chains which have experienced real shocks, a vast increase in industrial subsidies in major economies, and a restructuring of global trade from the net zero transformation. We've built our prosperity in great part because we are a great trading nation. And our great trading nation has to grapple with a world where trade can be a vulnerability as well as an opportunity. So that's why you've seen such a concerted effort from us to stabilise our relationship with Australia's largest trading partner, China. As you know, under the previous government, China effectively closed the doors to a range of our exports. Wine exports, so important to this region, shrank from a $1.1 billion market in 2019 to less than $10 million in 2022. Obviously, we thought a lot about this in opposition and had a very clear plan and approach to implementing government, and from day one of the election, after the election, we set about implementing that. And I'm pleased that after that, a considerable amount of work, impediments and wine were lifted in March of this year. Between April and June, Australia exported $376 million of wine to China, nearly half of all our wine exports for the quarter. 90% of that came from South Australia. In 23-24, we exported $15 billion of previously impeded products to China compared to only $4.4 billion last year. The approach we're taking is we think it's in our national interest to have a constructive relationship with our largest trading partner. Certainly it's in all of our interests to have our finest exports purchased by China's consumers. And given the challenges we face, we do want open lines of communication with one of the world's great powers. But I would make this point. We have, through calm and consistent engagement, restored dialogue with China, but it isn't only up to us. Dialogue does go both ways. And both countries have to choose to come back to the table. Both countries have made that choice. We know China will continue to assert itself in reshaping the region and the world. And China's interests, at times, will differ from ours. There are going to be issues on which we disagree. There are issues on which we disagree. For example, we will continue to press for impediments to rock lobster and remaining meat establishments to be lifted. This is the reality of two close trading partners with very different systems, very different values, and very different approaches to the world. So what do? Well, we can't imagine those challenges will disappear if we either leave them in silence or, frankly, if we go around picking fights and blowing up relationships. So we've sought to stabilise the relationship so dialogue and progress have been possible. Secondly, we're focused on working with you and the industry to diversify Australia's trade and investments so that we are less vulnerable to economic coercion. It's the geopolitical version of hedging. It matters to the nation, it matters to individual businesses. I think Australia knows too well the threat to our resilience of having too many eggs in one market. We live in the most competitive region in the world. This offers us enormous opportunity and equally large exposure if we fail to seize it. So I want to talk now about the region that I was born in before I migrated to Australia, and that's Southeast Asia. In 2022, Southeast Asia had a combined nominal GDP of, I wonder if we guessed it what it would be, how close we'd all get, around $5.2 trillion. Larger than the economies of the UK, France or Canada. Indonesia alone by 2040 is projected to be the world's 5th largest economy. But our trade and investment with the region has simply not kept pace with the growth of Southeast Asian economies. When we came to government, our direct investment in Southeast Asia in 2022 was lower than it was in 2014. So the market is growing and our share of it is declining. So we have to turn this around. And that's why we appointed Nicholas Moore, who's a former Managing Director of Macquarie, as our Special Envoy to Southeast Asia, and we asked him to develop a Southeast Asian economic strategy to 2040. And I said to him, Nick, I don't want another academic exercise about, how important Southeast Asia is and what else we have to do with it. I'd like to understand, because you're a businessman, what are the things we can do to make an appreciable difference? And so give us some practical ideas, both for industry and for government, and that's what he's done. So we've delivered a number of measures in response to the strategy, including a $2 billion investment financing facility, which is about boosting Australian investment in Southeast Asia, particularly on clean energy and infrastructure. We picked up another recommendation in the report, which was specialist deal teams. So these teams are being established in Jakarta, in Singapore and Ho Chi Minh City to work with investors. We've appointed 10 Australian business champions, all from the private sector, to work with government and the private sector and make sure we are working in tandem. And we're enabling more Australian businesses to engage in the region through a Southeast Asia business exchange. And I want to acknowledge the work of Don Farrell, who's been charged with, after the strategy had landed, a lot of the work of implementing has been in Don's portfolio. So thank you, Don, for the work you're doing there. We also are progressing the free trade agreement with the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and I know Don will continue to press for a solid deal with the European Union. We're building on our trade deal with India, the second most populated country in the world, and we're supporting exporters to take advantage of existing trade agreements, including with the UK. And all of this work, including with India, is benefiting local producers, and I know Wira Wira and Langhorne Creek's Matala have joined the list of those exporting to India. In fact, I'm heading to Wira Wira after this, and it now exports, I didn't know this until we prepped this, to around 30 wine markets around the world, so I'm looking forward to talking to them about that. Last week, Craig Emerson was appointed to lead an independent impact analysis of the wine and grape sector's regulatory options. This is part of a $3.5 million support package announced by the government in June to be delivered by Wine Australia to support the long-term viability of the sector. And you may know that we're extending support for wine producers by supporting the Wine Tourism and Cellar Grant Door Grant program, with applications for this year now open. So I've tried to give you a bit of a picture of some of the things we're trying to do across the country and working on helping Australians in regions, whether it's the cost of living, regional economies and opportunities, services, or help ensuring we have markets to export to. These are some of the big things federal governments can do. But I do want to say to you, I'm mindful as a South Australian with a long history, despite migration of a family here. My grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side had a sheep and cattle farm in the Adelaide Hills. And I'm mindful of the smaller things we have to do, which is how is it we can showcase our state. So I've tried to bring people here, and I've worked over the couple of years to bring a lot of international visitors here. We've hosted ministers and leaders from China, from Germany, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Philippines, from Tuvalu, and of course the United Kingdom, amongst any others. We brought representatives from 45 countries to Adelaide for the Vale Process Ministerial Conference, and last year I had the opportunity to bring the entire diplomatic corps to Adelaide and to the Adelaide Hills region. That is, ambassadors or heads of mission from about 80 countries as a way of showcasing our wonderful state to the world. All of that is part of our sincere and persistent effort to drive more interest in our state, to help open doors and open minds to the opportunities that await. And as long as I have the privilege to serve in this role, I'll continue to do that. Thank you very much for having me.